SIG, SIG Radio, Special Interest Groups, a TagTVOnline.com exclusive. Pick a SIG and propel yourself into top high-tech society. Right marketplace, right people, just right for power networking. SIG Radio, TagTVOnline.com exclusive. Pick, click, and prepare to power up.
This works. As I joked, having lived as long as I did in Russia, I'm used to having myself recorded, although usually without my knowledge. So kind of think of it as proto-podcasting. We'll just put it that way. Before I get started, I'd like to also acknowledge Peach Pods. Alan is sitting back there with the soundboard here. Makes me feel like a rock star absent the musical talent, but Peach Pods is the company that's responsible for the quality of the podcast that we do for Startup Lounge. If you haven't listened to it, they do a really good job. They make us sound really good. Someday, I think we'll get a very close circle of friends and some adult beverages, and we'll have just a listening session to the outtakes of StartupLounge.com, the magic of editing. But I got to be careful because there's no 7-second delay as I'm standing up here today. It's easy to sell money, and there's this is a picture from my old stomping grounds in Siberia, and this is the perception of Atlanta venture capital, rightly or wrongly. And one of the neat things about doing what I do at Startup Lounge is that it's actually not this way, but you have to work really hard. You have to dig deep to really find out where the action is, to really understand. There's a very vibrant early stage community here, and if there's one message that I can impart upon you today, I'd like it to be a message of hope, is that if you do things the right way, there is a possibility of raising funding. But people don't just give money away. Early stage ventures are risky. They require a lot of thought. They require a lot of passion. So it doesn't just happen. And believe it or not, this is not what Boston and Sand Hill look like. I lived in Boston, grew up in Boston, as you can tell from my accent, and I can tell you that I've never seen any buildings like this. Closest is the Prudential Center. I just have about 50 or 60 slides talking about Adams Capital today, and then we'll spend about 30 seconds on the actual topic. We're a valuation boutique. I think we're a pretty good firm. I enjoy working there. I am a consultant and a service provider, so I throw myself under the bus regularly on our podcast, and that's fine. If you're interested in what Adams Capital does and what I do there, please see me for more information, but I promised I wouldn't turn this into a 60-minute infomercial. My other identity, if you will, is StartupLounge.com, which we are registering as a 501c6 nonprofit. Scott Burkett is my partner in crime, so he shares equal credit and blame for what we do. Stacy Williams, Charlie Paparelli, who's here, I believe Jerry Leck and Ann Simons are also integral members of the team, and we could not do what we do without them. And the goal is to facilitate early-stage capital investment in Georgia. And I moved down here about 5 years ago, and as Cindy mentioned, I've lived in places like Minsk and Kiev and Moscow and other places where you think it's kind of difficult to raise capital for early stage ventures. And one of the observations that I had was it actually seemed harder to raise capital here in Atlanta than it did in those places shortly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, which didn't make sense to me. You know, we have a capitalist economy, we have a stable currency, you know, a lot of the things we take for granted, and we have a very vibrant technology community. So I wanted to understand why that is so, and understand if there's a role that I could play to try to help facilitate that. As Mark Twain once said, everybody talks about the weather, nobody does anything about it. In terms of what I'd like to accomplish with our conversation today, or I guess a little more of a monologue until we get to the Q&A, but is to really understand how the local capital market works. You can't raise capital unless you understand the capital market structure. Maybe leave you with a to-do list if you run out of here saying, oh my gosh, I actually can raise money. There's money out there. What do I do next? We'll give you a to-do list on what I think is important in terms of the capital raising process. try to show some pitfalls, avoid the sort of the silly deal-killing mistakes that are frequently made. Understand that raising capital is not an outgrowth of luck. It's not an outgrowth necessarily of natural talent, although in anything you do, talent does play a part, of course. But raising capital and entrepreneurship are a skill set, and it's a skill set that can be learned. Don't fight City Hall necessarily, but rather work within the framework that City Hall provides. Let me do that as a nonprofit. I'm going to issue a little bit of a call to action of things that we can do as a community that I think will improve the startup environment here in Georgia. And as you see these slides, there's a little dollar sign in parentheses, and that's things that I think are worth considering spending money on as an entrepreneur. You're going to have many opportunities to spend money as you grow your businesses. Some of them are worthwhile, some of them may not be worthwhile, and I'll share with you thoughts that I think are may be best to bring in outside help, and make sure you conserve what capital that you do have for the things that will really add value to and grow your business. So the challenge of early stage capital, frankly, is that it's hard. And it is a reality of our society. You know, in communism, and I participated in the transition of communist economies, capital was everywhere. They'd fund everything. You know, turn peanut butter into jet fuel, and psychically controlled airplanes, and conversion of military material to make rabbit toys out of titanium. And somewhere there's a silo in Siberia of titanium rabbits that are going to survive long after our civilization is gone, but somebody will find them. But it's supposed to be hard, but it is doable. I'd impress upon you the following, that it is not, raising capital is not necessarily an intellectually challenging experience. Okay? You don't have to be bright to raise capital. Okay? You don't, or overly bright. You have to have some minimum level of intelligence. But you don't have to be a genius to raise capital. But it's also not intuitive. You know, I play a lot of chess. One of the toughest things to do is to find the right move over the board. It's one thing to read a book and see what the move sequence is. But if you're faced with a position on the board, how do you find that move? In the post-mortem after the game, it's obvious, but when you're actually in it, you're actually emotionally invested in the activity, it's difficult to find the right move. And that's the challenge of capital. When you're in it, it's hard to make the right move, and that's where having advisors and people who know what they're doing can guide you along the way dispassionately can be helpful. The other element, by the way, it's also not particularly self-esteem building. If you have a weak psyche, raising capital is going to be very difficult for you, because you're going to, like me in high school trying to find a date, get rejected a lot. I think it's important to start out with an understanding of sort of some basic finance. And I'd like to thank Brian Rank of BNY Mellon here, who provided me with some data. I don't know if Brian is here, if he fled. There he is, out and back. But it's important to understand that wealthy individuals aren't just a $10 million check waiting to be written to you. You know, at some point, they have to responsibly invest in an allocation of assets that is going to build wealth and protect wealth for them over an extended period of time. Here's a sample portfolio, and here's what I mean. Within an asset allocation for someone who's, say, a net worth of $5 million or greater, you might see this orange piece be dedicated to what we call alternative investments. And for purposes of this discussion, we'll call them venture capital and real estate. Sometimes it also includes hedge funds and commodities. Of that allocation, as you can see, a little over half might be dedicated to venture capital in some form. Now, this piece of that piece of that piece is divided here, where the majority of it goes into venture funds. You hire professional managers who ostensibly know what they're doing to invest that capital in early stage ventures. And then a little piece of that is actually going to go to it's basically a personal E-Trade account, but for venture capital. You're going to do it yourself. And then of that, you may be eligible for some piece of a certain number of deals. Few people make one venture investment, unless they lose all their money and they never do it again. That's possible. But few people make just one venture investment, particularly if it's successful. They try to build their own portfolio. So it's important to understand, I get this question a lot. You know, these guys got $1 million, $5 million, $10 million. You know, why can't they write me a check for $5 million today? Well, that's why. The responsible thing from a financial standpoint is not to put all your your eggs in one very high-risk basket. As I think we're all aware, Atlanta is a really tough market. I've heard people say that Atlanta is a tough market because it's cultural, that Atlanta doesn't like to take risks. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that there are other environmental and very rational factors that make Atlanta the market that it is today. First and foremost is that it's a tough real estate market. I'm going to go into a little bit of depth there. But Atlanta and much of the Southeast has really been a real estate town. And you're competing with those dollars, as I showed you in the last slide. Disparate geography means less concentration of anything, right? I mean, some of you guys came from Alpharetta, some of you guys, I came from Chamblee. You're all over the place. You've seen Georgia Navigator. You know, you get up in the morning, it looks blood red on the major arteries all over town, right? It's hard to get any place. Successful entrepreneurs, more often than in other places, seem to take the money off the table after they cash out. If you're in Boston, here's one key difference regionally. If you're in Boston and California, you get a $2 million exit. That's enough to live nicely for a couple of years, but it is not enough to retire on and maintain your lifestyle. That's not the case in Atlanta. And a lot of people just say, that was great, enjoyed myself. I'm going to take my money and go to Lake Lanier, take my money and go to Johns Creek, and that's what I'm going to do. Investors here, I think, are less visible and accessible than other places. Atlanta is relatively new to the angel capital game. When we talk about comparisons to Boston and California, keep in mind this: the venture capital industry started there roughly in 1947, coincidentally in the same year roughly in both places. Atlanta really has been doing it since the 1980s. So there's a two-generation gap. There's a developmental issue. So if you think about where Atlanta is relative to how long venture capital has been a relevant investing mechanism in the local economy, Atlanta's about where it should be. In fact, it may even be a little bit ahead. We all have long, painful memories about 2000, 2001. That's why I'm not an angel investor. We haven't had enough home runs to attract new investors. We haven't had for a long time that big deal. Maybe J-Boss is going to be that one, but that's pure speculation on my part. And the dominant industries here are not all that venture friendly, right? Somebody got to have a startup airline here. Somebody got to have a startup major network here. Yeah, maybe, but I think that would be challenging to do. So it's not like Atlanta's home to tons of established biotech companies. We do have some software. We do have other things. If you think about the major industries, the admission price is $1 billion or higher. Let's talk about real estate. You want to look at in my view, if you want to identify one reason that venture capital has been tough to get in Georgia, here it is. Now, if there are real estate brokers in the room, please don't kill them. It's not their fault. They're doing what we're all trying to do, which is to make money. But these are real estate investment trusts, and these first two are actually entirely Georgia-based. So in the last 4 years, they've been making 25-26% on an annualized basis. And those are real estate investment trusts. Those are publicly traded securities. The ones that are privately traded are likely generating a 10 to 15% higher return than that on average. You've got to compete with that in order to secure somebody's dollar. Okay? That's tough. That's why people are saying we've got to generate X amount of return, because we have the opportunity to invest our dollars elsewhere. There's good news. On Wall Street, we would use a technical term, the market's in the toilet. And what's happening is that dollars are not doing well in real estate, obviously. But one of the other issues is now banks are less willing to lend. One of the neat things about real estate is historically you've been able to take a risk with somebody else's money, the banks. Well, the banks are now pulling back. So even if I'm inclined to invest in real estate, the financing is no longer there. Now you have an opportunity to show a more compelling rate of return relative to other alternative investment opportunities out there. Let's talk a little bit about the funding gap. Many entrepreneurs will observe, and Jeffrey Saul at the University of New Hampshire, I think, was one of the first to really clearly articulate this in a systematic way. The fact of the matter is it is really tough to raise money from between $1 million to $5 million. That's why you have the black hole there. And the closer you get to zero, and the closer you get to, say, $1 billion, the easier it is to actually raise the money. The reason why is a systematic gap, and I'm not sure how to fix it. I'm not sure if it's going to be fixed or even if it needs to be fixed. But this is the don't fight City Hall element. This is the reality, and you guys aren't going to change it. But between $1 million and $5 million, that's a tough nut for an angel investor. And if you think about that asset allocation, right, just to rationally invest in one deal, you got to have a net worth for a $5 million deal of $100 million just to put everything, all their alternative investments into your deal. Okay? The venture capital money is not going to come down this way because it's too expensive. You have $100 million, okay? If you invest in, say, $33 million businesses, the manpower that is required to adequately take care of and manage those investments is prohibitive relative to the economics of the venture capital business. They just can't do it. Secondly, most venture capital businesses are hiring professional finance folks like me, and most of them who come out of the MBA programs are trained to work in a Fortune 500 environment. They're trained to work in a revenue environment of $50 million or more, and that's a very different operational challenge and environment than the startup company. The skill sets just aren't there. So my advice is, figure out a rational way to get your deals into those areas. And if you're here, say, don't manufacture a need for extra money. Investors will see through that right away, and you're selling too much of your company. You're going to shoot yourself in the foot. Try to figure out a way to do more with less, and figure out what milestones you can hit with a smaller amount that will induce somebody to then make a larger follow-on commitment in the following round. Again, this is sort of the view of Atlanta's Angel Capital. It's always nice to work Nessie into a presentation here. But I think one of the things that I consistently looked at or encountered when I moved here was the view that there were no angel investors, and if there was some sort of mythical individual, and you didn't know where they lived, and you have people getting on the internet, you spot them at the Starbucks, and I saw him taking a swing on a 17th hole at Country Club in the South, that kind of thing. It's important, again, to emphasize that if you're systematic about raising capital, it can be done, but don't go chasing monsters in Scotland. And the reality is that deals are getting done. And I'll thank Scott Burkett, who has his own site. He pulls this data directly from PwC Money Tree. And these are early-stage deals. And I'll emphasize, these are reported early-stage deals. Now, most people, when they secure funding, don't run to PwC and say, hey, look, I got funding. Isn't that great? So, I think that these numbers are grossly unreported. But the point is that deals are actually getting done, and they're getting done in the way and the scope that you as entrepreneurs are looking for. So again, that theme, there is hope. If you're doing it the right way, if you're doing it systematically, it can be done. It's important to take matters into your own hands. And what I mean by that is it's tempting to kind of wait for venture capital to come your way. And an observation I'd make from our Startup Lounge Capital Connections events, soon to be renamed Angel Lounge, is when people people love to set up demo tables. And the reason they set up demo tables, I think, is that they would love investors to come to them. You love to have the science fair, all the investors come by, and hey, how are you doing? I love your thing. But the fact of the matter is that the people who don't have the demo tables, who aren't constrained by that geography, can get out there and proactively go meet more investors. And in fact, most people who had demo tables told me I didn't meet a single investor. They never even got to that room. So it's important to be proactive. It's important to have a plan. And that plan needs to incorporate the following. It needs to incorporate doing your homework. Who are the investors? Why do they invest? What are their priorities? it's important to get out there and network. You can't, angel investing is all about relationships. You can't just hand a high net worth individual a business plan and a business card and say, can I have some money now? It's not going to work that way. And even finding angel investors is generally going to take an introduction from somebody they trust, right? You can imagine somebody who is going to write that kind of check is in enormous demand, so you've got to find a way to get yourself head and shoulders above the competition. And it's not just how great your deal is, it's how strong your relationships are. It's important to determine which investors are real, and we'll take a closer look at that, but there is a phenomenon, and I don't fully understand it, but there are folks out there who like to impersonate millionaires, and then they sort of drag entrepreneurs around saying, I'm going to write this check, and all of a sudden they go away, and that unfortunately happens a lot. I'll provide some suggestions on how you can vet investors without alienating them right away. And finally, keep working on multiple contacts. Don't start a conversation with one investor. Oh, they're interested, we're going to get a meeting, so I'm going to devote all my time. A sophisticated investor assumes you're talking to other people. In fact, if I were an investor and I heard that somebody say, you're the only person I'm talking to, I'd start to wonder, well, what does everybody else know that I don't? So, don't feel like you're in a committed relationship after the first date. Make sure that you're working multiple contacts, because the deal can fall apart at any time. So, who are angel investors? Well, generally you have to be pretty wealthy to do it. And the interesting thing is, about 1 out of 25 households in the United States actually has a net worth of $1 million or higher. The angel investor threshold is probably higher than $1 million, but for purposes of our conversation, this is fine. Some still work full-time, some do not. Some want to be involved in the company directly, and basically they're buying into a job. Others want to have a much more passive role. They want to rely on you to carry the ball forward, and maybe they'll get involved in a board participation sense. Some may combine consulting with investment. I get asked a lot. This person wants to invest money, but they also want me to sign a consulting agreement. Is that kosher? I'm Catholic. I don't know what kosher is necessarily, but do I mean that I think it makes sense, or it means they're a crook? No, they're not a crook. That's frequently a model here. So that one thing should not necessarily put you off of that relationship. Angels generally earn their own money. Paris Hilton is not going to be an angel investor. Okay, they wouldn't know the first thing about it. They have no interest in doing it. So if you talk about, if you ask if you start to find out how they achieve that level of wealth, and you start to hear it's a third, fourth generation trust, that may not necessarily be a good person to seek out for angel investing. In fact, they may have provisions in their trust agreements that say they can't invest in anything like that. We talked a little bit about accredited investors, which is an SEC definition, and broadly speaking, it's any person with an individual net worth or joint net worth in the household where their net worth is $1 million or greater, or any trust with total assets in excess of $5 million. So if you hear the term accredited investor, that's what that means. And basically it's a term where the government tries to protect investors from themselves. It's to protect the person who's got $50,000 in their bank account and they're tempted to invest in the emu farm. That's what it's for. My Russian background coming in here, but finding angel investors is all about networking. I'm very skeptical of lists of investors. I'm very skeptical of sort of pay-to-pitch events. I'm very skeptical of online networking sites, putting your deal, and we're going to get you connected. It may be an outgrowth of my innate conservatism, but I just think there's no substitute for personal networking. And social networking tends to work a lot better than business networking, because in a social networking environment, you're going to have a built-in connection with that person. Whereas with a business networking event, I think investors tend to get very defensive.
Talking about real estate.
Yes. I've always enjoyed Donald Trump as a person who's been made out to be a financial genius, and God knows I'd love to have his wealth. And this may be a little bit difficult to read for some of you in the back, but basically one of the things we talk about is, you ought to try to raise money from friends and family if you can. And one of the advantages that Donald Trump has is, of course, he had a family that could give him $1 billion to start out with, and he's a financial genius. But somehow, if we take money from our parents and our friends and families, we're losers. So it sort of gives you that double standard. But other sources of early capital, before you go out, make sure that you've tapped every resource that you have. All right? It might be personal assets. I've seen businesses get launched by credit cards. Are you really going to let $10,000 or $20,000 stand in the way between you and your company? Friends and family, honestly, they're not investing for rational financial reasons. They just want you to succeed, and they want you to stop asking them for money at Thanksgiving dinners. Fine, take it. SBIR and STTR grants are government grants that are designed to promote and promulgate innovation. Generally, they require co-investment from a private source, but they're a good way to leverage a smaller amount of private capital. And there are actually other economic development funding sources. I get skeptical anytime you get involved with government funding, only because I don't understand how the government works. I look at things. How do people? What's this? But at least people purport to have a greater understanding. But from my point of view, where the goal is not to make money, it then becomes difficult to understand what the objective of the conversation is. Personally, I just don't know how to execute it. I'll talk a little bit about this. I apologize, this may be a little bit difficult to see, but I want to point out one issue, is that I talked about geography at the start of this presentation, okay? Why is it so difficult to meet investors at most of the networking events in the Atlanta area? There are a lot of reasons, but I'm convinced that one of them is geography. Counterintuitively enough, the dark green areas represent the wealthiest areas of Georgia. The light green areas are not as wealthy. These are actually quintiles. So this is the upper 20% concentration of households with an income of over $150,000 a year or greater. Now, here's where the meetings are. And it's upstate. This is where the MIT Forum meets. Those are a bunch of people, a bunch of organizations meet. Asher Club, TIE, Buckhead Club, 103 West, 12, Emory. Here we are down here, Georgia Aquarium. This is an issue. This is an issue that I'm not sure necessarily how to address it, but if you're looking for a target-rich environment, it's better to go someplace, if you can, that's going to be closer to the money. It's the reason why we have our networking meetings in Dunwoody is because we know the entrepreneurs will call naked over broken glass to get to a room where there's somebody who can write them a check, but we want to make it as easy for the high net worth individuals to get there. So if you're planning on starting up any meetings, or if there's somebody here who has influence, to the extent that we can get them up in that area, I think that's going to make the process easier. Talk a little bit about angel homework. It's really important to research an angel. The due diligence process has to go both ways. You need to make sure they're legitimate, and if you're going to sell to any prospect, remember you're selling your company, not a product. If you're going to sell to any prospect, you have to understand that prospect. Here's my list. I think every angel investor is going to have a different list, but here's my list sort of broadly of what I think angel investors want. Idea's got to be easy to understand. Here's that demo table concept again. If you acquire kind of like one of the old mousetrap game where you have the mouse at the end of the board and you trip this thing and a bunch of gears and cogs would work and eventually drop the trap, that's not the kind of idea that most investors get behind. And that's one of the reasons that a demo can actually be harmful, because you think you're being clear when you're actually not. If you really can't boil your idea down into a 30-second pitch that is clear, concise, and understandable, the idea probably needs to be re-examined. looking for customers or a clear path to customers. One of the key differences between here and Boston, Sand Hill, you're not going to get $500,000 for an idea. You're just not. And you can either rail against it all the time, or what you can do is you can modify your business and advance your business to meet the money halfway. Looking for extremely high returns. You saw what you're competing with in the real estate market. They want to have fun. Investors want to get along with you. The last thing anybody needs is to bring somebody into their world that's going to be a real pain in the neck. And it's even less attractive when you then become financially connected. I got to put up with you, you're a pain in the neck because you got $250,000 of my money. The angel needs to readily understand and like that industry. If you have to explain a lot of the industry, it's kind of like a float. If you have to explain a float at the Macy's Day Parade, it's not a good float. If you have to explain all the nuts and bolts of the industry that have just even less than a remedial knowledge of the industry, it's going to be a very uphill battle. One of the things that's important is to understand how to handle rejection. One of the biggest mistakes I see made is entrepreneurs take rejection as an entirely negative experience. It's important to be gracious and not burn bridges. People talk. Believe me, there are cocktail party stories. Don't press. You're not interested. Why not? Why not? Tell me why not. Make sure you thank them for their time. This is the toughest to do, because as an entrepreneur, by nature, you're an evangelist in the deal, and you don't necessarily want to be told that the emperor has no clothes. Well, on the other hand, you should at least examine the possibility the emperor has no clothes, or at least could be clothed differently. And finally, and this is the biggest mistake I see, ask for references to others for whom the opportunity might be a better fit. If maybe you have a healthcare deal and you're talking to somebody that just doesn't invest in healthcare, doesn't understand the space, well, find somebody who does. Angels tend to hang in the same circles together, so take advantage of that. Make that a positive relationship. Just because they say no to your deal, don't burn that bridge forever. There's still value that you can generate from that relationship. It's important throughout this process to proceed with caution. There are false angels out there. There are bad angels out there. That a bad angel is somebody who invests in a deal and really can't afford to. And if we have any financial advisors in the room, they probably all have at least one or two clients like that. Beware of capital brokers. In the low end of the market, it's really rare to see a capital broker that is successful because, frankly, the economics don't work very well. Be cautious of pay-to-pitch events, and there are a couple around town. I'm familiar with them. I'm not convinced that their hit rate is higher than that of the general market, and I'm not sure that you need to pay money for it. What they offer is really a shortcut, and philosophically, I'm not certain the shortcut is all that viable. Beware of online matchmaking. There are all kinds of bad things that can happen from that. Could be somebody who just wants to take your information. It could just be a waste of time, and it could be a waste of a fee. Beware of the hostage holding service provider. Beware of the service provider that says, I have 4 or 5 guys that I think would love to invest in your deal, but if you pay me $10,000 for this retainer to do some work for you, then I'll be happy to make the introductions. You hear that, run screaming. If you do that as a matter of professional course, stop. Beware of people who seem interested in your deal, but they're really job seekers. Beware of people who are CFO wannabes. I see a lot of companies fall into the trap. This is me talking as a finance guy. An accountant or financial person will say, you've got to have somebody financial on your team. They don't even have a salesperson yet, but you've got to have a financial person, or all these terrible things will befall you. The fact of the matter is, unless your company's making $10 million a year or more, you don't even need to entertain a CFO, and even then it's going to be on a part-time basis. So that's not a thing that's worth spending money on. Finding criminals. I actually had a deal like this a few years ago where a client was offered investment very early in the game, really after the first or second meeting, and a deal that I thought was viable, but I thought needed a lot of work. And so I did some digging, and it turned out that the investor was under investigation by the FBI as a front for money laundering out of Panama. So there are scenarios where people will try to use your deal basically as a vehicle to launder money, and God knows what happened. So we walked away. But there can be a criminal element in this part of the market. It's important to smoke out the fake investors, and there's certain questions out there that will help you detect the phonies. And questions like, what have you invested in before, or I need an attorney. Can you recommend somebody who can help me with some documents, or do you have a financial advisor, or tell me about an investment you've already made that hasn't panned out, or why are you interested in angel investing? And it's important just to ask probing questions politely, but again, due diligence is a two-way street. Don't go out there with an attitude that you've got hat in hand and I'm just begging for money. You're presenting what you think is a viable investment opportunity at a good rate of return relative to the risk involved. So make sure that you ask some tough questions. Now, don't go Guantanamo on them. Don't shine a bright light in their face and say, I found some old tax returns on Google. I'd like you to talk about this. Okay? But you can ask some probing questions politely that will give you meaningful insight as to whether or not that investor is legitimate or not.
Yeah. That last point. Don't be afraid to get bad answers.
Yes. I think a lot of entrepreneurs avoid asking the tough questions because they're afraid of what the answer will be. You don't want to be rejected, so you want to believe that person's going to write you a check, because it's so hard to find an individual, it's so hard to get somebody to the table. It's tempting to overlook a lot of obvious negative signs because you're so involved and emotionally engaged in the investing process. But be open to the bad answers. Be open to the answers you don't want to hear, because in the long run, that's going to help save a lot of time. Good angel deals. First and foremost, I won't go through all of this here, but first and foremost, the market and customer validation. We all believe you can spend money. Okay, the cost side is fine. We believe you can hire people generally. The issue really is, will the dog eat the dog food? So to the extent that you have market and customer validation, and this is one of the things I think is worth spending money on. If you can get a credible third-party market study, if you need to send out trial or sample products for free to get some market feedback, from the investor's point of view, that removes a lot of the risk. Very few startup businesses fail exclusively because they spend too much money. More often than not, they fail simply because they fail to sell enough. And this leads to the topic of market validation. Of course, if you build it, they will come comes from Field of Dreams. And if you think about it, it's really advice from a guy who wore no shoes to wear, couldn't write his name, and tried to throw the 1919 World Series. So probably not the guy you want to have formulating your market strategy. So in terms of market validation, the thing I hear most from entrepreneurs is, I'm lousy at sales, so get better. If you have no interest in getting better, get somebody on the team who does have an interest and aptitude for sales. I cannot stress enough how important revenue or customer validation is. Talk to customers even before you have a product, and even if it's an unfinished product. Actually, Scott once said something to me that I thought was very insightful. I carry with me to this day, but please don't tell him that. We're going to erase that from the podcast. But the question you ask yourself is, if you have a splitting headache, would you rather have a pill that can get rid of 90% of the headache today, or would you rather wait 2 years to get that pill that'll get rid of the whole thing? Most people would rather have the pill today. So even if you're not perfect, if you're a perfectionist, get over it, get out to the market, get customer interest. Things that are worthwhile, I think, to spend money on are trade shows and investing in high-end marketing materials, prototypes, mock-ups, things like that. When you bring an element of tangibility to your deal, it makes you that much more credible. In terms of sources of exclusion, we talk about what's the unfair competitive advantage. A lot of software companies say, I think we're going to be the next Microsoft. No, you're not. And you may be, but you're going to be the next Microsoft by Microsoft coming in and doing what you do with $100 billion of resources behind it. So what's the reason that somebody who's better funded than you can't just come in and do what you do and put you out of business? You got to think about that. question I get asked a lot is, how much funding should I look for? And this crude drawing here that looks like a 6-year-old did it, but my 6-year-old would do a much better job, is there's actually a very narrow range, and there's a little bit of finesse to it. But basically, the issue is, how much can you accomplish with a finite amount of funding, okay? And can you accomplish an objective after using that capital in the financing round that makes your company more attractive and makes your company more valuable? The other side of the coin, and this is equally egregious an error, is when you ask for too much funding. When you ask for too much funding, really two bad things happen. One, you're selling too much of your stock at a low price, which means your rate of return is going to be significantly impaired. The second bad thing that happens from that is you're basically telling the market, I have no clue how to manage money, so I need a huge buffer. That's not the message. You want to have a very tight plan, and one of the things I think, again, is worthwhile to spend money on if you need to, is get an accountant or a consultant who knows what they're doing to help you put together a solid financial model that's bottom up, that is driven by activity, not by I'm going to get 1% of the market, but rather here's where the money's going to be deployed, and here are the sales returns that will be generated from those activities. In terms of your pitch, a 30-second elevator pitch is one of the hardest things to do, because as an entrepreneur you feel like you have so much to say and so little time to say it in. Nevertheless, it's important to be brief. It's important to be as specific as you can, and quantitative goes along with that. Numbers convey so much more information than text does. You can write every number out that you want and get the same thing accomplished linguistically, but numbers are really just shorthand for quantity. And finally, be convincing. I can stand up here and be a little bit self-deprecating because I'm not trying to sell you anything. But if you're trying to sell something, especially something as difficult as an early-stage, high-risk investment to an investor, be convincing. Be that evangelist. Here are things that will kill a deal. I need money in 2 weeks so my company's going out of business. You're going out of business. Paranoia, non-disclosure agreements, and I'm sure there are attorneys here who will disagree with me. I'm going to add the disclaimer, I'm not an attorney. Listen to them, but not me. But in a practical sense, NDAs are really kind of senseless when you're raising money. It alienates the investor, first of all. And second of all, are you really going to sue somebody if they violate your NDA? You're looking for money, and now you're going to hire an attorney for $50,000 to pursue the NDA lawsuit. Spend your money on something else. Now, it does mean that you have to be careful about what you reveal, okay? But the fact of the matter is that if it's so easy to steal your business by just talking to somebody about it for an hour, you really don't have that, you may not have that exclusionary factor that would make the deal an attractive investment in the first place. Don't be arrogant. You get that a lot in Boston. Don't be too pushy. In Boston. There's accidental dishonesty. When you make mistakes in the basic facts or characterizations, the investor will typically take that as being dishonest rather than erroneous, and that's going to kill the deal right there. They can't trust you because there's so little data to operate on. It's just not going to get there. Don't discuss valuation early on. This is obviously not self-serving for me at all, but for early-stage ventures, it doesn't matter that much. Get the capital in. And the fact of the matter is, you don't know what your business is worth. I probably don't know what your business is worth. I could estimate. I'd be happy to take your fee, but I have no clue. So, if it's a choice between accepting a valuation you think is dubious and getting your business off the ground, get your business off the ground, figure out the valuation later. In addition, when you put valuation in a pitch or in a business plan document, that can be considered an offering, which opens up all kinds of liability. Advisors, I think, are really helpful. One, they stop you from drinking too much of your own Kool-Aid. They provide that reality check. Second, your advisor should be able to help you meet capital sources and help you meet customers. Those are the ones that really add value. I mean, advice is great, but ones that can help you get money in the door in some fashion are even better. And be aware of and limit the number of resume has. Lots of people like to say, I'm on this board, I'm on this board, I'm on this board, and it may or may not add a lot of value. It's better to have a small board with people who can really add value than have a board just for people who want to say they're on your board. This is sort of the feeling, this is sort of the sense of how people view venture capital, and this might be kind of one of the ultimate term sheets in history, the signing of the instruments of surrender on the USS Missouri. And I think as most people sort of enter their first venture capital deal, they kind of feel like this. Once you know, we see this as an equal partnership. But it's important that it's important to understand that when you're closing a deal, it requires a lot of finesse, like pushing string. Angels have to understand the market, the opportunity, the technology, and they have to understand you. Don't nitpick. As I said before, try not to let value get in the way. And if you're the type that really gets emotionally engrossed in these kind of negotiations, you can't separate it. It's worthwhile to spend money to get somebody to help you negotiate on their behalf. I've had good success with some clients and people that I just mentor that have gotten in front of an investor, they're really close to a deal, and the person just, they see the money, they see their passion, and they can't see the numbers straight. Get somebody who's experienced in negotiating deals to help close for you. And honestly, I think many investors would see that as a sign of maturity, saying, look, I can't handle this, so I'm getting somebody in who I think you'll find it easier to deal with. My presentation will be made available online so you can see this, but a lot of people want to know what typical investment terms are for the early stage deal. There's relatively reliable market data and recent market data. Everybody wants to talk about valuation. Most early stage companies have a $500,000 to $4 million pre-money valuation. Generally, an investor on average gets around 40% of a deal. Founders will still control the board generally, varies deal to deal. And the other thing is to think about what are the incentive options. You're not paying your employees in cash, you're probably paying them in options for tax reasons. So generally, on average, companies have about 20% or less allocated to the option pool. Here's your capital seeking to-do list. Do your homework on the business and get a great summary document. And again, legal review and professional editing and formatting are good things to spend money on. You don't want to get all the way to a relationship with an investor only to have it killed because you got 5,000 spelling mistakes. Create a pitch deck. Seek advisors. Identify the investor. There's your market. If you're going to sell a product, you identify who the customers are. You're trying to sell stock in your company, identify the investors. Discuss the terms. When you get rejected, revise and repeat. It may be with that same investor, or maybe with a different investor, but you're getting market feedback. Again, that goes back to turning rejection into something that is useful. And finally, you're going to finalize your agreement, and again, make sure that you have an attorney, your attorney review it. Don't just take the investor's attorney. Make sure that you have somebody who's working for you, giving you advice on your side. You can choose to take it or not, but at least you have somebody that's giving you the advice with your interest in mind. I was asked to provide a couple of case studies. We're coming into the home stretch here on companies that have actually recently raised capital. And one company that I've been working with, again pro bono, is actually I think they closed last week, so I haven't updated the slide. They closed about $500,000, and I think the key positives there was that the investor could actually talk to real customers and find out how interested they actually were, and those expressions of interest were convincing, and they were from people who actually have the authority to buy. I think the turning point, this guy had consultants all over the place who were telling him one thing to do or another, or spending all kinds of money, and eventually he just got fed up and fired him. And basically said, if you can't get me closer to raising money or getting a customer, I'm not even interested in entertaining a discussion. And that discipline was very helpful. And he was the person who hired an investment banker to negotiate the deal, and that turned a torturous 2-month negotiation into a 72-hour process. Case study number 2, I'd like to congratulate iVox. They've done a great job since winning the business plan competition last year. We had them on the podcast. And getting into that program was very helpful to them because it raised their profile. And and it gave them contacts with actual investors. They could prize something like $100,000 cash and $150,000 of various services. But since then, they've raised an additional $500,000. And that process was really helpful. So if you're thinking of getting involved in the business plan competition, whether it's the GRE Tag one or others, I think it's a good exercise whether you win the prize or not. Winning the prize is better. I like to win like everybody else does, but the exercise can be very helpful in terms of building contacts and developing discipline. Oops. And finally, another case study is a healthcare company that's got about a $250,000 commitment. They were working at it for over a year, and again, the key was customer validation. The other key was finding an investor who really understood the space and had a lifelong commitment to it. Things that we can't fix in the startup ecosystem here. California and Boston are different places than Atlanta. I think it's a mistake to try to make us the same as California and Boston. If I wanted to live in Boston, I'd still be there. Real estate is going to continue to compete for dollars. Again, realize you're not just competing against yourself, you're competing with other risk-return relationships from a financial investment standpoint. You can't manufacture home run investments. They have to happen organically. You're not going to meet many angel investors, I think, just hanging out at Starbucks or attending stage networking events. You can, but I think that a much more subtle, active approach is going to be more successful. And Atlanta's not a place you're going to raise $500,000 for an idea. So in terms of repairing the startup ecosystem, part of the issue, I think, this is why we have Pitch Camp through Startup Lounge, is, because we as a locality have not been at this a long time, entrepreneurs by and large don't have the same training and culture to really understand how to have that conversation with the investor. The thing that's happened time and time again at Capital Connections is we get investors in the room with the capital seekers, and the capital seekers don't have a very good idea of how to take advantage of that and execute the conversation. We need to encourage investors and successful entrepreneurs to become mentors. I know a lot of the people in this room already do that. We need to get more of that. That's how the education process happens. It doesn't happen by me standing up here. It doesn't happen through consulting. It happens from people who've been successful and know what they're doing, that give back to the community and take an active role. Reject the business models that exploit uninitiated investors and entrepreneurs. Let's not economically perpetuate the business models that take advantage of people that are naive and don't know what they're doing. Try to get more investor and owner-friendly meetings. Yogi Berra once said, it's so crowded nobody goes there anymore. And one of the issues with meetings around town is that it's been very difficult to get formats that investors and entrepreneurs can really find with one another. They get sold to by people like me all day long, or geographically it's tough to get there, or you have 10 minutes of networking and 2 hours of a speaker. So if we want to create that startup environment, we need to have meetings that are more conducive to accomplishing that goal. So finally, I don't think I'm too much over time, but angel money is hard and it's appropriate, but it can be found with great effort. Again, have hope. If you do things the right way, there's a reason to. Don't say to yourself, there's no reason for me to create a great business plan because there's nobody to show it to. There are people to show it to. They're just not lined up outside your door today. It takes a lot of effort and sincerity and drive and evangelism in order to get to that point. Most opportunities to spend money in the process of raising money aren't worthwhile. Hold on to your dollars tight. Everybody wants to get you to spend money on them. Don't. It's easy to kill a deal by losing focus. And finally, it's important, just as if you're selling a product, it's important to be organized, it's important to be energetic, it's important to be positive, and it's important to be open-minded and receptive to market feedback. So, in terms of fighting city, you can try to fight City Hall, and that's fine. Fighting City Hall takes courage. Boris Yeltsin stood up to the Red Army, but we also know, most of us know how he used to relieve stress, so it becomes a lot easier that way. Don't spend your time fighting City Hall. Work within the real and actual constraints of the environment. And if you're not contributing to the problem, beware, because otherwise, if you're on the podcast, you would go under the bus. Thank you very much. You've been a very patient audience. I'm available for any questions.
what's your question? Go ahead.
It sounds like after what if you're trying to raise capital, to me it might be better to go to one of your partners that's actually using your product versus go to angels.
I think you can. The caveat is you have to gauge whether or not your partner is going to see that as a sign of financial instability and wondering if you're going to be reliable. So you have to understand that relationship really well. But absolutely, for example, Intel has a very large corporate venturing department, and what do they invest in? They invest in anything that's going to sell more microprocessors, basically. I mean, the financial return is almost irrelevant to them. So absolutely, a partner can be a great source of capital because they already know you and they know the business.
The funding gap.
Yep. 1 to 5 million.
And then you ended with solution organizations. That conversation continued in Harvard. And what's different about the Columbia versus now? There's a whole lot more co-investing and communication going on. They're trying to take $4 million, $4,000 individual investments, stack them all together in a co-investment agreement. The only reason that you can see is that things come in the Southeast. That was in an organization. The billboards in the Southeast, regional reach.
Well, indeed, I think it is being done. I think the Atlanta Technology Angels has that as a mission, that they pool angels together to try to share deals. At Startup Lounge, we recently created a subgroup that Charlie Paparelli runs. It's called Angel Lounge, which is a peer group where early-stage investors get together specifically for the purpose of being able to share deals with one another. I think there are privately syndicated deals kind of among golf buddies, that kind of thing, that do happen. But the thing about 128 is a much more finite, compressed geography. And as you saw on the map here, it's all over the place. I mean, in our lifetime, Chattanooga is going to be a suburb of Atlanta, unless urban planning changes. So geography, I think, is part of what makes it a challenge. And also, again, those structured meetings where angel investors can easily identify one another in a safe environment is also an impediment. But to get back to the original part of the question, I do think that it's happening. It's not necessarily well publicized, nor should it be necessarily. But you're right, it could be done. It could be done more and better here.
I'd like to hear your opinion on how angel investors play those courses. Because now, there's so much money that, angel investors put, especially in early stages of open source, put people with common interests together. It's not money, for instance, people are looking, we're looking at doing systems, video razor. I'd like to do something bigger together. So I'll ask you your opinion. Do you see things coming up here in Atlanta?
Oh, I think so, for sure. In fact, that was a slide that I cut out as I realized my speech was going to take 3 hours. But clearly, investors have a role to play with their contacts and expertise in generating those relationships. And open source to me is a little bit of a dangerous topic, only in that I think it means different things to different people. I'm not sure there's a finite Webster's definition for it. But I think investors and entrepreneurs would like to see how more can be done with less cash resources, because relationships are a lot easier to generate. Once you use cash, it's gone. So I think that's a point that's very well taken. And one of the barriers, however, is that much of the wealth in Atlanta, particularly if it's new wealth, has been generated in the Bell Souths of the world, been generated in the Deltas, the UPSs, the Turners. Those aren't necessarily venture-friendly industries. So if you have a solar energy deal, or if you have an internet security deal, where's the cadre of seasoned executives from that industry that you're going to rely upon to build that open source? Now, with the internet, it may not have to be here. Geography becomes less and less relevant when you're talking about sharing of information. In fact, there's a great speech at the TAG event last week just about that. So.
One more?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm
glad you can make it.
I have a new product, and I'm looking to that goal. I have a list of things.
You weren't here for the demo part, were you? I think we know when you came. What's your question?
I'm looking for angels.
Okay. All right, we'll get you plugged into Startup Lounge. People raise capital to us, so we'll be happy to give you a hand.
Anybody else for one last question? Okay. You mentioned social networking was better than business networking. On one hand, it's a good thing, but then online matchmaking was a bad thing. So what's the difference between online matchmaking and social networking?
Let me clarify. I didn't say online matchmaking was a bad thing, but I said I'm very distrustful of it. It's a little bit different. There could be online matchmaking out there that is helpful. I just personally haven't seen it, but I'm not omniscient. I think that the way to develop a relationship, there are two ways you can try to develop a relationship. You can go in right away and say, I've got a deal, you've got cash, what's it going to take to get a deal done? To me, that's really tough because it puts your relationship already at a very guarded level and you've built in a wall instantly. But in the social construct, if you have the opportunity to get to know one another with a common interest, whether it's golf or whether it's a charity or a cause that you're really interested in, by the way, that's a great way to meet high net worth individuals at charity meetings. If you don't subscribe to Click Atlanta for the big social events, do that. That's a great way to find out what's happening around town. Now you have a chance to sort of tell people what you do in a non-threatening way. And if you talk about it enough, you show your enthusiasm, then frequently the conversation will organically turn to the situation of funding. That's great. You're working on a drug that may be able to treat ALS. I'd love to hear more about it. Somebody in my family's had that. And now all of a sudden, you've gone around that potential barrier.
Terrific. Well, I am not surprised that you had so many kernels of wisdom today, and thank you for a lot of humor. I know in the morning it's tough to get up and to learn a lot, but I certainly did, and I appreciate you, Michael. As a reminder, on his point of social networking, the Entrepreneurs Roundtable, again, for tech entrepreneurs only, downstairs, starting at 9:15 on the second floor, and it's an opportunity for you to meet with your peers, to pick their brains, to build relationships. We're lucky enough to have a couple serial entrepreneurs that have been very successful building companies, Scott Geller in the back and Sterling Morton, who will be plants in each of those roundtables, but you can also tap into their knowledge. So look forward to seeing some of you downstairs. Thank you again.
Thank you.